I want to start today with a figure that, honestly, it just stopped me in my tracks this morning. $8.6 billion.
Right.
And before we just, let that number wash over us like another crazy statistic, I really want to situate it. That's the amount of money raised for election-related activities just between January 2023 and April 2024.
It's a figure that feels totally abstract, but it's not. That's roughly the GDP of a small country.
Of a whole country.
Or, the entire operating budget of a huge multinational corporation. But this is all just for the business of politics.
Right. And usually when we talk about campaign finance, the conversation immediately goes to there's too much money in politics. And let's be honest, people's eyes glaze over. They've heard it for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at the sources for this deep dive, something feels different this time. This isn't just more money. It feels like a fundamental structural shift in what a political party actually is.
That is the absolute core of it. We are not just seeing an escalation. We're witnessing the maturation of a whole new political economy.
A new economy?
Yeah. I mean, if you just look back at the 2020 cycle, the total price tag for everything was nearly $30 billion.
$30 billion.
And the trajectory we're on now suggests we're going to climb well past that. But the how is so much more important than the how much. We're not just seeing, wealthy individuals writing checks to candidates anymore. That's almost quaint.
Right.
What we're seeing is this incredibly complex, industrialized plumbing system that completely separates the donor from the candidate and the candidate from the voter.
This is what some political scientists are starting to call the conglomerate party thesis, which I think is a really useful lens for our entire conversation today.
It is.
The idea being that the Democratic and Republican parties, they aren't really parties in that traditional sense anymore, groups of people organizing in their local communities. They're more like these massive, sprawling financial conglomerates.
It's a very compelling framework because it explains so much. The argument basically is that the party with a capital P has just become a brand. It's a logo.
A brand wrapper.
Exactly. The actual machinery, the fundraising, the data analytics, the strategy, the get out the vote efforts, all of that has migrated into what you could call a shadow bureaucracy.
And that bureaucracy is made up of this alphabet soup of entities.
The hybrid PACs, the super PACs, the 501c, four nonprofits. That's the real party now.
So that's our mission today. We are going to act as forensic accountants. We're going to follow that $8.6 billion and see where it goes.
Through the pipes.
Through the pipes. We have to understand the engines that are driving this whole machine, specifically these hybrid PACs like Act Blue and Win Red. We need to see how super PACs have evolved from just buying ads to actually running the campaigns themselves.
And then we have to go into the shadows, into the world of dark money, to see how the original source of all these funds is deliberately hidden.
And the hook for all of this, for you listening, is that we're going to uncover how a donation from a completely anonymous shell company can end up paying for the canvasser who shows up at your door.
And ultimately, it all leads to a bigger question. If the party is just a financial network of consultants and billionaires, where do you, the voter, actually fit into that picture?
Okay, so let's start with the mechanics. The engine room of this whole operation. Most of our listeners, they've heard of PICs. They've definitely heard of super PICs. But this term hybrid PIC keeps coming up in all the source material. Or, to be more specific, the Kerry Committee.
This is the legal innovation that really greased the gears for this entire system. The term itself, it comes from a 2012 federal court decision, Kerry v. FEC.
So what was the world like before Kerry?
Before this, you had a very clear firewall. On one side, you had traditional PACs. They could give money directly to candidates, but they had very strict contribution limits. This is what we call hard money.
Okay, a few $1,000s per person.
Exactly. And on the other side of the firewall, you had super PACs. They could raise unlimited soft money from anyone, corporations, unions, billionaires, but they were forbidden from giving it to or coordinating with the candidate.
And the idea behind that firewall was, if you limit the amount of money going directly to the politician, you limit the potential for direct quid pro quo corruption.
Theoretically, yes. That was the principle.
Yeah.
But the Kerry decision came along and essentially allowed a single organization to look at that firewall and say, why not both?
So just knocked a hole right through it.
A huge one. A hybrid PAC, or a care committee, is one single organization with two separate bank accounts.
Okay.
Account A operates just like a traditional PAC It takes in those capped, limited donations, and it can cut checks directly to politicians.
The hard money account.
Right. And then you have account B. It operates like a super PAC. It can take unlimited checks from anyone and spend that money on so-called independent expenditures, like TV ads.
But wait, they're housed in the same organization, run by the same people in the same office.
Precisely. They are legally required to keep the money in separate bank accounts, but the strategy is completely unified. It completely dismantles that operational firewall we talked about.
So you have one brain, one strategic director, who can simultaneously direct the limited hard money for candidate donations and the unlimited soft money for attack ads.
Yes. It allows for an incredible amount of coordination and efficiency that was impossible before.
And this legal structure, this is what has given rise to the two absolute titans of modern political fundraising. We simply cannot talk about this without talking about Act Blue and WinRed.
No, you can't. They're the duopoly. They're the Visa and MasterCard of political money.
It's so easy to just think of them as, payment processors, like a PayPal for politics. You click a button, you donate $5. But the reading suggests they are so much more than that. The term that keeps coming up is conduit.
Conduit is the correct legal term, but I think a better metaphor might be the central nervous system of the party conglomerates.
Okay, explain that.
Act Blue, which serves the Democrats and progressive causes, and WinRed, which was built to be its Republican counterpart, have fundamentally nationalized campaign finance in America.
Let's just pause on the scale of this first because the numbers are wild.
They really are. Act Blue is the incumbent giant here. They've been around longer and really perfected the model. In the period leading up to May 2024, they had processed over $1.1 billion.
$1 billion.
They've been the dominant force since around 2014.
Yeah.
And they were the ones who really pioneered that, recurring subscription model of small dollar donations. Give $3 a month to save democracy.
And WinRed is the challenger, right? Built to catch up.
Exactly. They were launched to close that massive digital fundraising gap for the Republicans. And in that same period, they raised about $623 million.
So that's nearly $2 billion flowing through just 2 online portals. But let's go back to what you said about them nationalizing the funding. What does that actually look like on the ground for a candidate?
Okay, so let's say 30 years ago, you were a Democrat running for a House seat in, rural Ohio. You raised your money from local businesses in your district, from the local unions, from fundraisers in your neighbors' living rooms. Your financial base was inextricably tied to your constituent base.
You had to answer to the people who were funding you, and those were the same people who were voting for you.
Yes. Act Blue and WinRed completely shattered that geography. Now, a donor sitting in a coffee shop in San Francisco or on Wall Street in New York can get an urgent text message or email that an algorithm has targeted to them.
Right. This Ohio race is a must-win. Chip in now.
Exactly. And with 2 clicks, they can funnel money into that Ohio race. It completely flattens the map.
And what does that do to the candidate in Ohio?
It creates a situation where that candidate might be far more financially beholden to a national donor base, people they've never met who live 1,000 miles away, than to the actual people they're supposed to represent.
So it forces them to align with the national party narrative, the big hot-button culture war issues.
Because that's what triggers the online donations. It's much harder to get a donor in California excited about funding a new bridge in your district than it is to get them to donate based on a national outrage. It centralizes financial power.
And these platforms, they don't just serve individual donors, do they? They're also clearinghouses for the conglomerate itself. It's not just about me giving $20 to a candidate. It's about how money moves between these big political organizations.
Correct. Because they are legally conduits, they facilitate massive high-speed transfers between leadership PACs, the national party committees, and all sorts of other affiliated groups.
So the party leadership in D.C. can use them to instantly shift millions of dollars to a race they deem critical.
Or to a candidate they want to prop up, or, to starve a candidate they don't like. It centralizes strategic control in the hands of the national consultants who control the email lists and the text message campaigns, the people who control the data.
Which brings us perfectly to the next layer of this machine, the loophole. If Act Blue and WinRed are the engines for the hard money and the small donors, then the super peaks are the playground for the billionaires.
That's a good way to put it.
But I want to push past the basic definition everyone knows from high school civics. Citizens United happened, corporations are people, money is speech, we get that. What is the operational shift we're seeing with super PACs now in 2024 and beyond?
The single biggest shift is that super PACs are no longer just the advertising arm of a campaign. They're becoming the campaign's infrastructure itself.
See, this is the distinction that I found most jarring in the research. Traditionally, my understanding was that a super PAC runs the nasty attack ads so the candidate can, keep their hands clean and talk about puppies.
Right. I'm Jane Doe, and I approve this message. That was the classic model.
But now you're saying they're the ones knocking on doors.
This is the slow, deliberate erosion of the independence requirement. For years, no coordination was the golden rule. A candidate's campaign was legally forbidden from telling a super PAC what to do, where to spend its money, what ads to run.
But that wall has come down.
The Federal Election Commission, the FEC, which is the regulatory body here, has been issuing rulings and advisory opinions that have whittled that wall down to, a picket fence with huge gaps in it.
And it seems like the biggest gaps are around the ground game. Canvassing, voter registration, get out the vote, or GOTV.
Right. Think about it. A ground game is incredibly expensive. It's labor-intensive. You have to hire hundreds of people. You have to train them, manage them, track their work. It just burns through that limited hard money, the cash the candidate raises directly, very, very quickly.
So the rules have been relaxed to allow campaigns to just, outsource this work?
Effectively, yes. They can't explicitly direct the super PAC day-to-day, but there's so much cooperation allowed now on things like canvassing strategies and voter data that the line has become almost meaningless.
And we saw this play out in a very real, very public way during the 2024 election cycle.
We absolutely did. The Trump campaign, for instance, made a very clear strategic decision to outsource a massive portion of their ground game operations in key swing states.
To America PAC, I believe, which was a super PAC reportedly run by Elon Musk.
Exactly. And on the other side, the Harris campaign was relying very heavily on a network of outside super PACs, mostly run by longtime party operatives, to handle similar voter contact functions.
So let's trace the incentives here because it's pretty clear. If I'm a campaign manager and I can get a super PAC, which can accept a $50 million check from a single donor to pay for my hugely expensive canvassing operation.
You're going to do it every single time.
It frees up all my hard money, all those $5,000 checks, to spend on the candidate's travel or TV ads that they can star in themselves.
It is the only financially rational decision to make. But think about what that means for our conglomerate party thesis. The actual physical interaction with the voter, the person standing on your porch asking for your vote, is no longer an employee or a direct volunteer of the candidate.
They're an employee of a vendor.
Who is paid by a super PAC.
Which is funded by a handful of billionaires or corporations.
It effectively privatizes the core functions of a political campaign. The candidate becomes the public face, the figurehead, while the actual operations are run by these external, unaccountable financial nodes.
And these nodes are just unimaginably massive. The data from the 2024 cycle show that shell companies and nonprofits gave $1.3 billion to super PACs.
And that's more than the prior two election cycles combined. The amount of untraceable money is exploding. The total dark money in federal races just hit a record $1.9 billion.
And it's not just the big party super PACs anymore. We're seeing these very specific sector-focused super PACs entering the arena with huge amounts of weight. The one that jumped out at me from the data was called Fairshake.
Fairshake is a perfect case study of this new political economy. It was a super PAC funded almost entirely by the cryptocurrency industry.
Companies like Coinbase, Ripple, the venture capital firm, and Andreessen Horowitz.
Right. They poured nearly $160 million into the 2024 cycle. And their strategy wasn't Republican or Democrat. It was purely transactional.
So they weren't tied to an ideology.
Not at all. They supported candidates from either party who were crypto-friendly, and they ran brutal attack ads against anyone, Republican or Democrat, who was seen as a regulatory hawk.
It creates this almost mercenary dynamic within politics.
It absolutely does. When you have a single-issue super PAC with that much firepower, $160 million, they can effectively veto a candidate in a primary election just by threatening to spend against them. They can reshape the entire policy landscape before a single person even casts a vote.
But at least with a super PAC, we can see the donors. It's not easy, but I can go to the FEC website and I can find that Coinbase gave money to Fairshake. The trail is there, even if it's complicated. Where the trail completely vanishes is when we step through the looking glass into the world of 501c4s.
The social welfare organizations.
Which just sounds so benign, doesn't it? Social welfare. Like a community bake sale?
It's the specific designation in the tax code. 501c4s are nonprofits that are supposed to be dedicated to social welfare. The classic examples are groups like the NRA on the right, or the Sierra Club on the left, or even your local civic league.
And they are allowed to participate in politics.
They are, with one very important caveat. It cannot be their primary purpose.
And this is the infamous 49% rule, right? As long as their direct political spending is less than half their total budget, they're generally considered to be in the clear.
Effectively, yes. The IRS is notoriously hands-off with enforcement. But the crucial distinction, the absolute key to this whole puzzle, the reason they are the black hole at the center of this universe, is that they do not have to disclose their donors to the public.
So this is where the Russian nesting doll strategy comes into play.
It is the ultimate shell game. Let's walk through a concrete example. Let's say you're a very wealthy individual or maybe a corporation in a controversial industry, like, say, fossil fuels or pharmaceuticals.
Okay.
And you want to inject $10 million into a key Senate race to run ads attacking a candidate who supports heavy regulation of your industry.
But I can't have my name on it. If my company's name is attached to those ads, there will be a boycott, bad press, all of it. I need total anonymity.
So you write that $10 million check, but you don't give it to a campaign or even a super PAC. You give it to a 501c4. Let's call it Citizens for a Sustainable Future.
A nice, vague, positive-sounding name.
Always. That organization, Citizens for a Sustainable Future, takes your $10 million. They do not have to report you as the donor on any public filing. Then they turn around and write a $10 million check to a super PAC.
And the super PAC does have to report that donation.
They do. But when you look at the super PAC's public report on the FTC website, who's the donor listed for that $10 million?
Citizens for a Sustainable Future.
Right. The trail ends there. The original source of the money has been completely and legally scrubbed from the public record. It's laundered.
And the scale of this is not small. I was stunned by this statistic. In the 2024 cycle, 45% of all online ad spending came from groups that were concealing some or all of their donors using this method. Nearly half.
It turns the entire election into a masquerade ball. You are being bombarded with messages, but you have absolutely no idea who is actually speaking to you.
So we need to talk about the titans of this dark money world, because there's often this tendency to think this is just a Koch brothers thing on the right or just a George Soros thing on the left. But the sources make it clear that the infrastructure is fully, and I mean fully, developed on both sides.
It is a permanent parallel arms race. And if we look at the left, the dominant player in this space is, without a doubt, the 1630 Fund.
Which is part of the larger Arabella Advisors network.
That's right. Arabella Advisors is a for-profit consulting firm that manages a massive network of nonprofits, and 1630 Fund is their biggest political spender. The scale is just staggering. In the 2020 election cycle alone, the 1630 Fund spent $410 million.
Okay, let's just pause on that. $410 million. That is more money than the Democratic National Committee itself spent in that same period.
Yes. Let that sink in. The shadow party outspent the official party.
Unbelievable.
And in that same year, they raised about $390 million, and half of that money, nearly $200 million, came from just 4 anonymous donors.
Four entities essentially bankrolled a massive portion of the entire progressive political machine. And their strategy is really specific. They use a technique called fiscal sponsorship.
This is the key mechanic to how they operate. Instead of running a bunch of ads saying, paid for by the 1630 Fund, which means nothing to a voter in Arizona.
And sounds like a DC group.
Right. They incubate dozens of these little pop-up groups. Piedmont Rising in North Carolina, Floridians for a Fair Shake, Rocky Mountain Values in Colorado.
They all sound like authentic, local, grassroots organizations.
That is the entire point. It's a practice known as astroturfing, creating the appearance of a grassroots movement. These groups pop up out of nowhere, run millions of dollars in ads on very specific local issues or candidates, and then often they just disappear or go dormant right after the election.
So it creates this illusion of a broad, localized consensus on an issue when, in reality, it's a centrally funded and centrally managed national strategy.
And is incredibly effective.
Yeah.
The data shows they had a 77.4% success rate on the ballot measures they targeted in 2023.
Wow. Okay, so now let's look at the other side of the arms race. On the right, the strategy is a bit different. The heavyweight there is Americans for Prosperity, or AFP, which is famously backed by the Koch network.
Right. They tend to focus less on that rapid pop-up group model and more on building permanent infrastructure.
Explain that difference.
AFP's model is what political scientists call the permanent campaign. They've spent decades and billions of dollars building a literal physical presence in the states. They have full-time salaried field directors, community organizers, and brick-and-mortar offices that stay open year-round.
So they're not just showing up in October of an election year.
Exactly. While the Arabella network might be designed to flood the zone with ad hoc groups for a specific election, AFP is trying to shift the long-term ideological baseline of a district or a state. They're playing the long game.
But the funding mechanism is the same.
The funding mechanism is identical. AFP Action, their super peace arm, tripled its spending since 2020, reaching over $157 million in the 2024 cycle. But a huge chunk of that money comes from affiliated 501c4, so the ultimate goal is the same: to move policy and win elections using vast sums of money from a very small circle of donors who are completely shielded from public view.
And one of the, I think, most insidious tactics that's emerging from these dark money networks, and I'm using the word insidious very deliberately here, is the pop-up news phenomenon, or what some researchers call pink slime journalism.
This is a direct and opportunistic response to the utter collapse of the local news industry in America, as legitimate local newspapers go bankrupt and leave these news deserts.
These political networks are stepping in to fill the void.
They're launching hundreds of websites that look, feel, and sound exactly like local news outlets.
The North Carolina Examiner was one of the examples cited in the research.
Right, or the Copper Courier in Arizona. If you land on one of these sites, it has a professional masthead, it has sections for state news and politics, it has a generic, clean layout. It looks completely legitimate.
But the content is not independent journalism.
Not even close. It is partisan copy, often generated by a central hub, written specifically to advance the agenda of the dark money network that is funding the entire operation.
But if I see a link to a story on that site and share it on social media, my uncle doesn't see paid political ad from the 1630 Fund. He sees an article from the North Carolina Examiner.
It completely hacks the trust that we have, or I guess that we used to have, in the institution of local reporting. It's a way to launder partisan talking points and bypass the natural skepticism people have for political advertisements.
This brings us to the battlefield where most of this money is actually being spent, where these bombs are detonating, and that is overwhelmingly the digital space. The shift away from traditional broadcast TV to streaming and online platforms it's not a shift, it's a landslide.
The numbers were explosive. Just looking at the 2024 cycle, digital ad spending spiked 156% over 2020 levels. It reached $3.46 billion.
Wow.
But the real story within that story is CTV connected TV. That's your Hulu, your Roku, your YouTube TV. Spending in that category grew by 506%.
500%. So why the massive migration to streaming? Is it just because that's where the eyeballs are? People aren't watching cable anymore?
That's certainly part of it, but the much more important driver is the power of micro-targeting.
Okay.
Broadcast TV is a blunt instrument. If I'm a campaign and I buy a 30-second spot on the 6 p.m. local news in Philadelphia, I am paying to reach everyone watching. Democrats, Republicans, people who never vote, people who live in the suburbs, people in the city. It's incredibly inefficient.
A lot of ways.
A ton of ways. But on a platform like Hulu,
it's different.
Completely. On Hulu, I can upload a specific list of voters that I want to reach based on voter files and commercial data. I can tell a platform, show this ad only to women between the ages of 30 and 45 who live in these 3 specific zip codes and who also subscribe to outdoor magazines.
So this leads to a complete fracturing of our political reality, doesn't it? Yeah. My neighbor and I could be sitting on our couches watching the exact same show at the exact same time. But I am seeing an ad about how the candidate is a champion of the environment. And he's seeing an ad about how that same candidate is going to raise his taxes to pay for socialist programs.
We are effectively participating in 2 entirely different elections. There's no shared public square of debate anymore. And crucially for this conversation, this digital space is much, much harder to track and regulate. We call it the gray money problem.
Explain that gray area. What is gray money?
So on broadcast television, there are strict public file requirements that have been in place for decades. You can, in theory, go to the TV station and see who bought the ad time and how much they paid.
Right.
The big digital platforms like Google and Facebook have some disclosure tools, but they're often opaque and difficult for the average person to navigate. And when you combine that institutional opacity with the Russian nesting doll structure we just talked about, it becomes nearly impossible to track.
And there was a specific example of this involving Americans for Prosperity Action.
Yes, it's a perfect example. AFP Action, their super PAC, spent about $7 million on a wave of online ads.
Okay.
Because they are a super PAC, they do have to report their donors.
Okay.
But one of their single largest donors was their own affiliated dark money group, the 501c4, which gave them $25 million.
So the online ad says, paid for by AFP Action, which is technically true.
But the money that paid for the ad originated in the dark. That's gray money. It's technically disclosed, but the disclosure is substantively meaningless because the original source is still hidden.
So we've looked at the engines, the hybrid PACs, we've looked at the loophole, the super PACs, we've gone into the shadows with the dark money groups, and we've surveyed the digital battlefield. I want to pull the lens back now and connect all of these pieces back to that conglomerate party thesis. Because when you stack all these bricks together, you really do build a wall between the party as an institution and the people it's supposed to represent.
That is the inevitable and I think, frankly, the logical conclusion of all of this. The hollow party thesis, which is what this is sometimes called, argues that the traditional party organization, the one that was based on dues-paying members, on local volunteers, on county committees, that party is almost completely withered away.
It's been replaced.
It has been replaced by a nationalized network of professional consultants, data scientists, super PACs, and these massive wealthy donor networks like the Democracy Alliance on the left or the Koch network on the right.
So the material reality of the party is no longer people. It's just a bureaucracy of finance.
It is entirely a top-down structure. The research suggests that it's funded by really fewer than 1,000 individuals who underwrite the major committees on both sides. These are the people who are effectively deciding which races are considered viable, which candidates get the institutional support, and what the core messaging is going to be for an entire election cycle.
But it wasn't always this way. I feel like it's important to touch on the death of public financing for elections, because there was a time, not that long ago, when the government actually tried to level this playing field.
There was. I mean, do you remember the little checkbox on your tax return? The one that says, check here to donate $3 to the presidential election campaign fund?
It's still there, isn't it? I think I saw it on my 1040 this year.
It is, but it's basically a historical relic at this point.
Mm-hmm.
The entire system effectively broke in the 2008 election. And the turning point was Barack Obama.
Walk us through that specific moment. Why was that the breaking point?
So up until 2008, every serious major party candidate took the public money for the general election. There's a huge grant of money, but there was a catch. If you took the public funds, you were legally forbidden from raising any private money. It was a hard spending cap.
So it was a trade-off. Guaranteed money, but a limited budget.
Right. And in 2008, Barack Obama's campaign looked at their revolutionary online fundraising machine, which was really the precursor to the modern small donor model we see with Act Blue. And they did the math. They realized that taking the public money would actually hurt them. It would limit their budget.
So he opted out.
He became the first major candidate to opt out of the system.
Yeah.
He went on to raise an absolute fortune in private money. And, of course, he won the election. And that single decision broke the norm.
Because no one could afford to be the one who took less money.
Precisamente. Once he proved that you could raise far more on the open market, no serious contender could ever afford to take the public grant again. It would be unilateral disarmament in a financial arms race.
So the free market for political money effectively killed the public option.
At the federal level, yes, completely. Public funding for the party conventions was eliminated in 2014. It's all but irrelevant now. There are some bright spots in the states. Arizona and Connecticut have clean election grant programs that have survived court challenges and work reasonably well, but they are the outliers in a national landscape dominated by private, untraceable money.
I want to touch on one final consequence of this conglomerate structure because we've talked a lot about the donors and the consultants at the top. But what about the activists, the actual people on the ground who are genuinely angry about issues and want to create change?
This is what some academics are calling the activist's dilemma. You have a system where gaining legitimate political influence requires access to billions of dollars. If you are a grassroots movement, a student group, a community organization, and you don't have that money, what are your options?
You protest. You make noise. You have to be disruptive to get attention.
You have to disrupt the system. But the research is showing a fascinating and, frankly, very depressing trend. Extreme protest actions, blocking highways, shutting down infrastructure, even things like throwing soup on paintings, they often generate a significant backlash.
A backlash from the public.
Yes, the public might get so annoyed by the disruption that they end up supporting the opponent of the cause. The tactic backfires.
But if they play by the rules, if they just write letters and make phone calls, they get completely drowned out and outspent by the conglomerate.
That's the dilemma. They're damned if they do, damned if they don't. And the system is now actively tightening the screws on that disruptive option. We are seeing a wave of new laws at the state level that categorize disruptive protests as attacks on critical infrastructure.
And that carries much harsher penalties.
Massive fines and felony charges. So if you're a 22-year-old climate activist and you participate in a protest that blocks a road, you could get hit with a $50,000 fine. Your life is effectively ruined.
You are financially incapacitated. You can't participate anymore.
Exactly. This creates a filter. It ensures that the only safe and viable way to engage in politics is through the professionalized, well-funded channels we've been talking about, the 501c4s and the passies. It sanitizes dissent and keeps all political action within the boundaries that money can ultimately control.
That is a profound and chilling realization. The system isn't just funding the winners, it's actively shaping the very nature of how opposition is even allowed to exist.
It creates a closed loop where the only speech that's truly protected is the speech you can afford to buy.
So we have covered a lot of ground here today. We've moved from the initial shock of that $8.6 billion figure to the nitty-gritty mechanics of the carry committees. We've seen how platforms like Act Blue and WinRed have become the central nervous system for the parties, and how the shadow party of super PACs has effectively taken over the ground game.
And we've traced the path of the money. From that anonymous mystery donor, through the 501c4 laundering machine, into a super PAC, and then finally onto your smart TV screen in the form of a perfectly micro-targeted, psychologically honed advertisement.
And crucially, I think we've established that the candidates themselves are, in many ways, increasingly just avatars for these massive competing financial networks, the 1630 complex on one side versus the Koch network on the other.
It completely redefines what an election is. It's less a battle of ideas or personalities and more a battle of capitalization and logistical infrastructure.
I want to leave our listener with one final provocative thought based on everything we've unpacked today. We so often hear about voter apathy, about people checking out of the political process, and usually the blame is placed squarely on the voter.
We say they're lazy or they're uninformed or they just don't care.
But if the machinery of our democracy is actually funded by a shadow bureaucracy that you can't see and can't influence, and if the parties themselves are really just conglomerates of consultants and billionaires who see you as a data point to be manipulated, then maybe checking out isn't apathy. Maybe it's a rational response to the power dynamic.
If you realize you're just the audience for a very, very expensive show, you can't really be blamed for wondering if the price of the ticket is worth it.
That is the question. The next time you see a political ad on your TV or in your social media feed, try to find out who paid for it. And I mean, really try. Dig past the Citizens for a Better Tomorrow name. If you hit a wall, if the trail goes cold at a nonprofit, then you'll know you've found the edge of the conglomerate. Thanks for diving deep with us.
A pleasure, as always.